Our next speaker is Martha Jean Baker. Martha is just on my left here. Martha is an international vice president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. A major focus within WILFA has been the International Criminal Court and Security Council Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security. She was a founding member of the Gender Action for Peace and Security, that's GAPS, network that works on this resolution 1325. As WILFA executive member, she worked on the planning of the successful and now ongoing Voices of African Women's program. She is a trained human rights lawyer. Now Martha will give, she'll give an overview of Women's International Peace League for Peace and Freedom, that's WILFA. WILFA's representation work with the United Nations and the Gender Action for Peace and Security Network, and any other legislation she feels should affect the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine, for inviting me. And I'm going to speak mostly about WILF and about the relationship that WILF has with the United Nations. But I will also be touching a little bit on the Democratic Republic of Congo. WILF is an organization that was founded in 1915 in an effort to stop World War I, and since 1915 it's an organization that's been of women working on peace and security issues, as well as social justice and women's empowerment. Certain issues that we see as very new and modern are issues that our founding mothers thought of way back in 1915, like the relationship between trade and justice and the root causes of war. And if they had thought about it, I'm sure they would have talked about climate change as well. WILF was one of the organizations that was accredited to the League of Nations and was the first women's organization to be granted ECOSOC status by the United Nations. So I came here thinking that I was going to talk mainly about two things. The so-called GEAR campaign, which is the gender architecture, what's the gender, I know I'm getting it wrong. Architecture. Basically, what the UN has decided to do, it's been a long campaign, it's decided to bring 4 disparate women's agencies together to form one large women's agency under an Undersecretary General. It's been decided. What hasn't been decided is the funding, and we fear that it will not be adequate. We fear that without an initial budget of $1 billion, it will be dead on arrival, and people are talking of a budget of maybe half that. We also are hoping that there will be a very strong woman chosen as this undersecretary, but these are things that are all to be decided, and we hope that there will be a decision in time for the review of the Millennium Development Goals later this year. WILF has been very active in the GEAR campaign, a gender entity architecture reform. It's a member of both in Europe and in New York at the United Nations of the coalitions of organizations that are working on this. I don't really have time to go into all of the political issues that are surrounding this, but I guess I'm not speaking loud enough?
It's not, I'm sorry, we haven't got the mic set.
Okay. Well, I don't really have time to go into it's very interesting, the UN political situation around the GEAR campaign, and that itself would be subject for a meeting, perhaps a meeting of its own. A little over 10 years ago, WILF started a project called Reaching Critical Will. Now, Reaching Critical Will is related to Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and it is a very active project which is used by many researchers throughout the world, by governments, by all kinds of people, and to provide information on disarmament, and particularly nuclear disarmament. It's a very well-respected project of WILF. WILF made history this week as the first NGO to be invited to present a statement on its own, as opposed to just submitting it and having it read out at the Disarmament Committee in person. So one of our staff people in Geneva was able to read that out just a couple of days ago. It's very exciting, and it is a landmark. The other project that we have is called Peace Women, which was started just about 10 years ago, right after the passage of Security Council Resolution 1325. Now, Resolution 1325, again, was a landmark resolution because it was the first UN resolution, the first Security Council resolution, to deal specifically with women's issues. And it talks about women's empowerment, and women should be involved in decision-making on all levels, in conflict prevention, and at the peacemaking, and at the table. And it was introduced by Namibia. I point this out because I think it's significant that Namibia was the president of the Security Council when it was passed in October 2000, and it was passed unanimously. It has some amazing words in it, and there was a coalition of about 10 NGOs that worked on and lobbied for its passage. I am told by reliable sources that the woman who at that time was running our UN office was one of the major drafters of Security Council Resolution 1325. 1325 also, in its 9th paragraph, refers to a number of other very important treaties, and to say we need to be, in effect, be using those to bring empowerment and to get women to the table. And those include the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CEDAW, the Convention to eliminate all kinds of discrimination against women, and the International Criminal Court. Now, there are now 4 resolutions from the Security Council involved in the empowerment of women. 1325, which was passed in 2000 and was introduced by Namibia. And just about 2 years ago, the United States introduced Security Council Resolution 1820, which talks about violence against women in the context of war and rape as a weapon of war. And just last year, the U.S. again introduced Resolution 1888, which is more about the violence against women issue. And of course, the violence against women issue is very important, and then the rape as a weapon of war is very important. I personally find it significant that the U.S. introduced those two because that's an issue that in effect will sell in the U.S. press. People will pay attention, will be interested. I was overjoyed when 2 days after 1888, Security Council again unanimously, all of these were unanimous, passed Resolution 1889, which was introduced by Vietnam. And 1889 gets back to what I see as the core work here, which is the empowerment of women and giving women a voice, putting them at the table. Now, the UK section has an ongoing project which was mentioned called Voices of African Women, which was inspired by women from the DRC who are active members of WILF. And WILF looks at root causes of conflict and connects these causes in order to suggest ways of working to prevent and end conflict. The DRC is a very rich country, and the conflict there is often portrayed as one of ethnic crisis or in all kinds of ways that it's not. my colleagues from DRC who I've met have said to me, you know, it's such a rich country that if I cut a tomato and I drop a seed and a seed falls on the ground, two days later I have a plant.